G'day humans, welcome to the safe space for dangerous ideas. One idea that's particularly dangerous at the moment is the idea that much of what we consume in the alternative media landscape is actually manipulated and in some cases funded by people who want our countries to unravel, who want us to be at each other's throats, who want us to self-destruct, who want us to dismantle the institutions and the international agreements that have kept the peace since the Second World War. That is the allegation, basically, that the US Department of Justice made when it released information about an investigation that it had into the way that Russia was funding certain online commentators and podcasters through pretty shoddily set up shell companies in the United States. Ross Anderson is a journalist who has covered many of these individuals for quite some time. He's the life editor at the Spectator's World Edition. He's a columnist at the New York Sun. He's a young guy, a fascinating guy. He's been on the show before. He really has his finger on the pulse of the alternative media ecosystem and some of the grifters who you will find therein. He had a podcast called Arguably that's worth checking out, and you can find more of his work at thatrosschap.com. That's thatrosschap.com. He has a piece coming out about this fiasco shortly, and you'll be able to find it there. But this is a fascinating dive into exactly how this scam worked and what it can tell us about the influence of foreign governments and our enemies on the information that we consume. Enjoy as much as I did, the one and only Ross Anderson. So, Russia is doing things. Surprise, surprise. Who would have thought? I'm not surprised
Russian
that Russia's
collusion
doing
hoax,
Josh. Yeah, that's right. This is Russiagate Part 2. So most people will have heard about the existence of this news story, but can you tell us what is alleged and what we know precisely?
Yeah, sure. So on September 4th, DOJ basically had an indictment about a Russian influence operation. The details were extensive, but anonymous, and it was pretty clear that it was about a Tennessee-based company that two Russian nationals had been using, who were associated with RT, had been funding $10 million through as a sort of Russian influence operation through the American media.
Now, RT was Russia Today, but Russia Today doesn't
yes.
exist anymore, or it does? I thought it went out.
No, Russia Today is still cheerfully going along.
Okay.
So for good listeners can get reliable news there. No, but that is a state's.
I am old enough to remember a time when people really genuinely believed that Russia Today was a legitimate alternative source of news. I mean, I suppose some people still do, but like when I worked at HuffPost Live, one of my co-hosts had come from Russia Today, and she has since done a really good job of sort of reckoning morally with that, and unfortunately has had a personal falling out with her mother, who is in Russia still and who is a Putin apologist. But at the time, it was considered to be just an alternative source of news and information from the corporate captured American mainstream press.
Yeah, and I think Russia Today has the unique aspect that it's natively in English. Russians obviously aren't native English speakers, but RT broadcasts primarily their content is primarily in English. This is unlike Al Jazeera, which is also a state broadcaster, but it is the version that you're consuming is the tweaked, polished, libbed up version for a Western audience. And if you read the Arabic versions of Al Jazeera, they're a lot less politically correct, let's put it that way. Whereas right. RT is not just made for a Russian audience. There's lots of Russian propaganda that is made for their own country. RT is pretty intentionally made that they try to persuade people from abroad that they're trying to look like a normal, publication.
Yeah,
and I mean there is like BBC in a way.
I haven't, as you can tell, because I didn't even know that it still existed. I am not across Russia Today today, but Russia Today in the past did quite a clever thing, which was they actually did do good journalism as well, didn't they? I mean, in my mind, it's a little bit like the Wall Street Journal or even Fox News, where you have genuine reporting, good. Well, maybe I'm being unkind to the Wall Street Journal because they do excellent journalism. But, you do have real news sprinkled in through the opinion, which makes it feel more legit. And Al Jazeera America as well. Go on, shoot
I'm
me
sure
down.
there
I
is.
can see you. I can see the brow furrowing. As you think, how early in the show is it okay to make Josh look like an idiot on his own show?
Let's get some more coffee. No,
Yeah.
I will get. No, I mean, I do think that there is, but unlike an organization like Fox News and different publications that have areas that we can criticize their coverage, right? Jesse Waters is not great news coverage, but it is at Fox. There are opinion people who I have a lot of criticism for. There's also some great journalists, and there's, even on the broadcast side, they have a mix of stuff. Some of it goes nuts, some of it's pretty solid. Still, they're just straight news coverage, pretty good, and they exist to provide a product to news consumers. That people are looking for this. RT is slightly different because there may be some good journalism smuggled in there. Same with Al Jazeera. That is a result of them hiring some good people, and wanting to sort of reputation wash, but the organization, make no mistake, is a propaganda arm. It's a state broadcaster. It's not, and state broadcaster, BBC and ABC exist, but this is pushing the Putin agenda, and if there's anything quality smuggled in there, it's exactly basically for moments of conversation like this, so that you go, oh, well, I saw this very good thing there. They can't just be there to fool people, to trick people, to push people.
Right. I mean, I'll set aside for the moment the fact that a Russian would probably look at Fox News and think that it is a propaganda arm of the Republican Party of the United States.
Sure, but I mean, I think that, to be fair, though, I think there's a difference between, and we'll get into this with the going on with Tenet and stuff, but there's a difference between Dave Rubin saying anti-Ukraine stuff before signing on to Tenet, and you just go, this is a guy who has opinions independently of being involved with the Russian operation, and opinions that aren't. So to the same degree, sure, there are people on Fox who end up pushing stuff that's very pro-Republican in a way that feels certainly not balanced and fair. But they're not doing so because they're bought and paid for by an operation to push a narrative. They're doing so because they're nuts, and they don't really have self-restraint. But I think that's a separate thing, and I think it matters that it's a difference.
So you think it matters whether or not a person amends their output on the basis of the money they're being paid? I'm not sure I'd say it as cleanly as that.
No, I don't. I mean, I don't think it's easy, but I just mean on a level. I don't think you can say something. I don't think propaganda is decided by necessarily content and the look. It needs some level of payment behind it, of a motive behind it that isn't necessarily clear often to the people who are viewing it, that they don't know that's what they're getting. Again, RT doesn't want to broadcast itself, doesn't want to portray itself. They don't have Putin shirtless on a horse on the top of the website and the same, but they want you to think that it's a legitimate news organization.
No, I understand, but I mean, I guess
he's being paid.
My concern, just to clarify whether or not there's a there in the distinction between various forms of media bias. There's a whole, yes, the Republican Party and the US government doesn't fund Fox News to be biased, but there's an entire network of kickbacks, privilege, back-scratching, corporate subsidies, corporate tax cuts that are implicit in the relationship between Rupert Murdoch and his empire and Republican politics that are sort of inextricably linked. It's not as direct as, the Russian government is funding this media arm, but like the Australian government, as you said, funds the ABC, and we have a presence across the Asia Pacific in broadcast networks that are funded by the Australian government. Do they take directives from the governing party in Australia? No, they're editorially independent, but of course, they're there to promote a view of Western liberal democracy and a view that is favourable to Australians across fledgling democracies in the Asia Pacific, in just the same way that the US did behind the Iron Curtain during the Cold War with Radio Free Europe and things like that. It's not clear. I mean, obviously, it's clear to me that handing bucket loads of cash to podcasting hacks because they're useful idiots is so far along the spectrum that it's beyond the pale. But to me, it does still seem to be a spectrum rather than an on-off switch of bias.
Sure, and I mean, and you can see that with stuff like Musk, for instance, has long been criticized in this in his general coverage and his political output. How legitimate is that? I mean, I do think certainly now Elon Musk's political views seem like a very, very real thing he believes. The truth is there are very few people who are faking what they believe, but a lot of people come to believe what they do out of motivated reasoning. That's certainly the story with a lot of the people at Tenet, I think. But with Musk, for instance, is he this strong Republican Trump-supporting person now out of actual conviction? Or is it that SpaceX is a government contractor and highly dependent on getting those contracts? The Biden administration's been oddly negative about Musk generally, though not in a way that is reflected on SpaceX. They still hire out well. And people have long criticized Musk for his strong entanglement with China, that Tesla has been struggling to perform there, like many Western car brands have, but they have had an advantage, and he has always put himself out there. And the question is, like, is his friendliness in that direction towards China, is that motivated by political and financial gains? Almost certainly, yeah. So how do we separate that out in his view with the American right?
You're even more cynical than I am. I assume that he just has a cultural bias towards, he so hates the woke mind virus, and and
his daughter and stuff like this, I can't remember if the daughter,
if it's a daughter or a son. He lost a child, Ross. How dare you? He has lost his child to the woke mind virus.
In the woke wars, in the war on Christmas.
This is why it's imperative that J.D. Vance be the vice president. Don't you see the connection here, Ross? You're a fool.
So I think he's sincere. To be clear, like I'm not doubting that's part of it, but I think that if you had, if it was pretty, if Biden hadn't been elected, if they had someone who was marginally younger and had been less
marginally younger than Joe Biden.
Yes,
there are only 3 people in the world.
Not included.
Only 3 people in the world younger than Joe Biden.
The terracotta, they're part of the terracotta army in China that aren't as young, as old as Joe Biden.
Anyway, yeah.
But if they'd chosen someone who was a bit younger, who didn't have senility issues, that didn't exclude Musk from electric vehicle talks at the White House, and were pretty obviously going to win in this upcoming election, I don't think Musk would have pivoted as hard and as publicly.
Okay, so we've established that motivated reasoning is a spectrum, and we're all a little bit biased.
Yes,
myself included. I have preconceptions. But
everyone should visit Australia. We are part of the Australian Tourist Board propaganda. Hey. I will say, there's an amazing song. I don't know if you've ever listened. I first found growing up in Mullum, and it's the Australian Tourism Board song. Mullumbimby, baby. I'm the second most famous person from Mullumbimby. Yeah.
Also, how did you just call Mullumbimby by an abbreviated name that even I, a native Australian, have never heard?
I'm surprised you don't.
Mullum? Who calls it Mullum? Mullumbimby is a hippie hillside town in the hinterland behind Byron Bay, where a bunch of pot-smoking losers surf and grow weed, and presumably call it Mullum in their spare time.
Exactly.
Yeah, so what do you remember from your time growing up?
There was a going to school there was a song, the Australian Tourism Song, and it's I'd recommend people search it up. It's like an Australian comedy duo, I think, made it, and it's just a list song of all the various Australian animals that can kill you, and then come to Australia, you might accidentally get killed as the chorus. It's extremely good.
I have not heard this. No, but I can't believe that you're teasing me about wanting to be a shill for the Australian Tourism Board, because this is actually something that I would really like to do, and I've actually, honestly, because what they do is they'll sometimes, like, I have friends who I won't name who are famous Australians, and you can go and, like, they'll send you to the most amazing place. You go to the Great Barrier Reef, go to islands and stuff, and you can go to, well, who'd want to go to fucking Mullum? I mean, please. But, you can go to the outback and you can go on these like indigenous crocodile tours and things that you would ordinarily never be able to do, and the tourism board can get you in there. So if I'm going to shill for anyone, screw the Kremlin.
We'll do that.
I want it to be the Australian Tourism Board and go to some of the most beautiful places in the world. So yes, we've established there's a spectrum and that we're all kind of shilly, but let's talk about the wildness of how, some of these complete, let's just confess up front, Ross, wasn't there a little bit of schadenfreude when you heard this story? Just a touch. Weren't you just like, oh, isn't this sweet? Isn't this sweet? Lil Davey and Tim.
Fun.
Two people, I got a lot of shit a couple of years ago for going on Joe Rogan's show and calling Tim Pool a dum-dum. And he didn't like that. And he sicked his Twitter followers on me because this was during the whole Australia has fallen. Like Australia is a totalitarian
the concentration
state.
Camps.
The concentration
you were a defender of that.
Yeah, he was tweeting out like aerial shots of these like arrival bungalows, which were sort of repurposed mining facilities where people with COVID who were arriving, or even people without,
were being sent to the mines.
People who were arriving in Australia and who needed to be quarantined before being released into the COVID-free community were being housed in these mining quarters in the top end in the Northern Territory, and he was claiming that these were concentration camps where innocent Australians were being rounded up without due process and kept indefinitely. And so I called him a dum-dum, and I got to say, when a couple of years later I find out that he is literally either a dum-dum or a corrupt Russian propagandist, I was like, okay, I trust my own judgment. I was prescient.
Yeah. It's, to be honest with you, I wrote, for those who aren't familiar, I wrote a short piece on Dave in 2022 that ended up in Collab. It was about 7,500 words. And it was just sort of this extensive profile.
This is where we first met,
history.
I should say. You hit me up and you asked me for an interview, and so I appeared in that piece being quoted about Dave, and thus
Josh regrets to this day.
Was born. No, it was a great piece, very comprehensive, and actually very even-handed, and not a hit piece in the way that. I'm sure Dave thinks it's a hit piece, but I think it was actually pretty. Yeah,
he's not pleased. He wasn't pleased with it, but
but he has the skin of a thin eggshell. Poor little dear.
But it was, once I wrote that, it was very easy. I try not to use Twitter as much as I did, and I still, I didn't try to use it much then. And there were a bunch of people asking me to basically do this, do that for Peterson, do that for Crowder, do that for a bunch of, people. And I have resisted that quite a lot. I don't, in journalism, a lot of people have beats. This can be your thing. I really did not want to do that, and I haven't. I wrote a quick piece for Tablet about when Candace Owens was trying to blackmail Stephen Crowder because I was just too good. And I'm coming back for this with Dave, but I never intended to write about him again. But yeah, this was so bad, it dragged me back, laughing and screaming.
So let's just loop back then. So the Department of Justice is not investigating the podcasters and internet creators who were being paid millions of dollars by the Kremlin. They were announcing that they are seeking the arrest of Russians who are in Russia, who were paying for this, who commissioned it, who never are going to come to America, so it's all for show, or what?
Yeah, basically. So it's an indictment of these two Russian nationals who I'm not going to even try. One of their names is like Kalashnikov. I'm not going to try and pronounce their names, but it's like comic. This whole story is stupid. They're the most two Russian names in the history of the world. Of course they are.
Just
Why not?
A long string of consonants
basically.
It's basically Scrabble contestants. Very high
My
score.
Mullum education did not equip me to say those names.
All Zs and Js and Ks.
But yeah, and they put this indictment out. Now, they could also be pursuing the founders of this publication, which is a woman named Lauren Chen, who started a YouTube channel called Roaming Millennial in 2016 and was her own sort of thing. She's been at Turning Point USA, The Blaze, sort of a lower tier figure in sort of anti-feminist YouTube in the 2016 era, and then pivoted this into a sort of trad wife commentary world. Okay. And in 2021 to 2022, she had an opinion column in RT. And then at the beginning of 2022, right around the time that she stops writing her column, she starts a media organization in Tennessee called Tenet, founded, turns out, by very generous donors, these two Russian guys. Now, the DOJ probably could go after, because they're going after breaking FARA, which is the Foreign Agent Registration Act, which is basically saying that you're working for another government, and you're representing, you're pushing their interest, and that you need to register that formally, and money laundering to that end, as a Russian propaganda operation. Now, technically, if they had registered with FARA, there probably wasn't anything illegal here, but that again makes a publication look a lot worse if it explicitly says we are registered as being Russia affiliated.
Yeah, I mean, I think in the modern day and age, this is like using espionage rules that were written for World War I in the age of the internet. Like, should I so my income comes through an American-based company because the internet, right? And I presumably am. I mean, I'm not funded by a government, I suppose, so that makes it different. But like, if I was still drawing a salary from the public broadcaster, then would I have to register? Like, I mean, it's so fuzzy with the internet now. But that doesn't change the incredibly unethical and idiotic and corrupt nature of what was being done. So just setting the law aside, presumably the reason why the Department of Justice is doing this is in order to raise awareness about this phenomenon, rather than any realistic expectation that it's going to lock people up for it. Or
exactly. I mean, they could, as I said, they could probably go after Chen and her husband Donovan, who founded this. They probably won't, though. It's in the run-up to the election, and they don't want to look politically biased, is the explanation I've heard.
Sorry, Ross, is the claim...
they may also still do so.
Is the claim that Lauren knew that this was a Russian... So where does the knowledge about the Russians stop?
The DOJ are clear that the co-founders, they knew. So, for instance, they would try to get calls with their investor, who they made this fake name when Rubin and Poole asked about Gregorian, this fake Belgian
it was
banker.
It was a comical name, wasn't it?
It was a comical name, and it was a name that they misspelled and spelled differently depending on which document people were looking at. And obviously, you can search for this person online, and so not a very good fake cover, but
when you did search for this person online, nothing came up.
Nothing.
So they didn't even bother. In other words, when we'll get to precisely what the claim is that these podcasters did in a moment, but their protestations are that they are victims of this scam, victims who made millions of dollars that they're not going to have to give back.
I want to be victimized like that. Damn.
I want to be
Australian Tourist Board. Victimize me, please.
I want to be raped. I mean, if that's what victimization looks like, give it to me, baby. I want some of that Kremlin cash. And their claim is that they couldn't possibly have known that there was anything suspicious about these incredible sums of money that they were getting paid.
I don't think that even they don't have the audacity to say we couldn't know there's something suspicious. They've said that they've gone as far to say they were fooled and they didn't know. And to be fair, the DOJ initial indictment, and Merrick Garland has followed this up by saying none of the influencers knew this was a Russian organization.
No, of course you don't know if you don't ask. But the point is, did none of them open up a little piece of technology I call Google and type in the name of the person who supposedly is paying them a fortune, and then see that nothing came up?
So apparently they did. Dave apparently searched that. They had somebody, I don't know if a voice actor or someone do a voice for them. The details there are still a little fuzzy.
But wait, he says he Googled them, but nothing comes up if you Google this person.
And Dave's explanation, he did a interview with Megyn Kelly yesterday where he finally talked about it in more depth. I had asked him for comment for an article of mine that's coming up on this. He finally blocked me, which I felt heartbroken about. But so he's not talking to me, which I found shocking. But yeah, he basically said that, oh, there are private people out there, which, I mean, come on.
I mean, there are private people out there, but there generally aren't private people out there who want to funnel enormous amounts of money to you. And
in media startups,
you should probably be cautious about.
And usually, like, even private investors, they have some presence in some world that you're familiar with.
Yeah.
Like, if he was legitimately a Belgian investment banker, or Belgian investor who is a banker, again, not clear, you should have been able to find something. For instance, on the bank he supposedly worked at, when he wasn't listed anywhere to do with it. That would have been a red flag, I think.
Also, is the claim that there was never any indication about what the money was for, or any indication of what kind of content this beneficiary?
So benefactor. That's where it gets complex. I'll just say that Dave, on his search to find the truth of this person, a short and shallow search, one must say, he asked for a one-page profile of this guy, sort of CV of who is this guy. And at one point it said that Gregorian was interested in social justice. And it seems to have been a language slip-up with the Russians writing this thing. And he was quite concerned by that. He didn't want to be taking woke money. We ain't taking no woke money around here.
No.
And they assured him, no, Mr. Rubin, he is not woke. And
taking the money
sort
of homophobic authoritarian dictatorship.
Dude, he's visit Hungary. He's fine on that. Come on.
Yeah, right. Is fine, but don't take money from social justice wokesters. I mean, what's interesting here is that the talking points of these guys have aligned for quite some time with the talking points of the Kremlin in a way that defies explanation from just absorbing it. I mean, it's not, they're not coming up with this stuff. Like, have you heard the clips of what they were saying? I don't know if Dave was included in this, but what some of them were saying after the terrorist attack in Moscow. Remember the terrorist attack at
Benny
the
Johnson said this.
Moscow. Can you explain
144 people died in. So it was a March terrorist attack on a concert in Russia. It's one of the biggest terrorist attacks in Russian history. 144 people died at this concert when gunmen just came in and just tore into the place. So just horrific.
And this was a jihadist. This was an ISIS.
This was
attack.
ISIS claimed it about a day afterwards. The U.S. government, I think, said that there was strong. Instantly, reporting was, this seems like it's ISIS.
Yeah.
And terrorist activity from ISIS has been prominent.
Another
in
thing
Russia.
that was interesting about that, I think, was that the U.S. intelligence and Western intelligence debated with themselves about whether or not to give Russia a heads up that this thing was coming, because they heard chatter about it and they had intel, and they set aside their differences with Putin and with Moscow over Ukraine, and they gave Russian intelligence a heads up and said, listen, we're hearing ISIS talk about something big going down in Moscow, so here's what we know, just from a humanitarian point of view, even though we're enemies at the moment. That assisted to some extent and then the Russian response. And then
exactly, and the people fled. These terrorists. My understanding is they fled in the direction of the Ukrainian border. So that's the only factual anything that comes close to the then widely circulated claim that was pushed by Putin that ended up with some online right-wing people, including Benny Johnson, who also got paid as part of Tenet, that Ukraine was actually behind this, that this was some guerrilla warfare strategy to cause terror in the heart of Moscow.
Right.
Again,
and so some of these American YouTubers and podcasters were talking about how there's something very fishy about this supposed ISIS terrorist attack in Moscow. This is probably a Ukrainian operation and so on. And these were talking points that were coming directly out of Russia that it's unlikely you would just automatically think of if you were just an impartial, skeptical American journalist with no ties to Russian misinformation.
I am a bit split in that, because I think people underestimate how much brain rot and conspiracy theorism there is in this space, that there's the dumbest fucking ideas that you've ever heard in your life, and they get bandied around, and people just go, well, maybe it is. I remember when I was writing my big Rubin piece, there was a moment where he was doing a Q&A basically with his audience, where his paying audience members asked him a question, and somebody said, is the support of Ukraine...
To hear the rest of this conversation, go to uncomfortableconversations.substack.com/listen, and you will get your own personal premium podcast feed with at least 3 extra episodes of the podcast every month and heaps of extra stuff, including the remainder right now of the fabulous conversation you've just been hearing. If it was worth listening to this much of, don't rob yourself of the rest. Pull out your phone right now and search for Uncomfortable Conversations on Substack.